Hello, thank you all for coming. My name is Shelley. I'm the program coordinator here at IFC Center. This is a really special one-night screening, as you all know. Good on you for getting your tickets before it's sold out. I want to take this moment just to remind you to please silence your cell phones. You would be surprised how many people actually forget to still do that in today's age, and then it's really embarrassing when that goes off during the Q&A, which also, as a reminder, there's a great Q&A afterwards. Please stick around. I'm going to pass off the mic now to Paul Rachman, who will do an introduction, who is the director of American Hardcore and the co-founder of the Slamdance Festival. Please welcome Paul.
Thank you, Shelley. Hey, good evening. Thanks for coming out and supporting independent film on a Wednesday night in New York. Actually supporting a Slamdance film. That's even better. I was talking to Shelley before. Slamdance used to do monthly screenings here, like between 2004 and
I'll put in a word to bring it back.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would be nice, but I think he got too busy here. He couldn't get any more space. But we've been coming back occasionally for evenings like this. So this is a great film, the Desolation Center. This is a film that premiered at Slamdance in 2019, so it was a year ago. And this film has a very interesting festival history because, like a lot of films that we program at Slamdance, this is a film that, in its first year of festival life, actually didn't get into any American festivals. It got into all these really big European festivals. It played at CPH Docks, it played at Sheffield in the UK, Indy Lisboa, like important European documentary festivals. And I knew about this film, so people have been telling me about it, and I forgot about it, and I heard about it again. And eventually it got submitted to Slamdance, and we looked at it. The first cut we saw, I think, this needs a little more work. Maybe, we were very serious about this film, but Stuart, Swezey, the director, really attentively worked on this film, and we were able to we had the US premiere after a year of it touring in Europe. Which is kind of typical for a film with this kind of subculture, because in Europe they always looked west for music and cinema culture. And a lot of the big festivals in America, I don't think Stuart had sent it to Slamdance in the first year, are kind of tone deaf to a lot of American subculture. They're all looking for big kind of Sundancey films and stuff. So it was a perfect marriage for Slamdance. And it was, we welcomed him. He had great screenings in Park City, and I'm so happy to be here tonight with Stuart for this New York City premiere, kind of. Manhattan premiere, right. That's right. So, but that was a long time ago. Anyway, you have to stay for the Q&A. I don't know if you were told that. We have a great Q&A with Ranaldo and Shelley from Sonic Youth, and Jenn Pelly from Pitchfork, and of course Stuart Swezey, the director and the creator and promoter of the Desolation Center. These were his events, and he ended up making the film about this, 20 years later. So I hope you enjoy the film, and we'll see you in 90 minutes. Hey, hello again. So, let's get started. Oh, well, here they are. So, let's welcome everybody. So, Ranaldo from Sonic Youth, Shelley from Sonic Youth, Jenn Pelly, contributing editor from Pitchfork, and last but not least, Stuart Swezey, producer, director of the Desolation, creator of the Desolation Center. Come on, guys. Grab a seat, go everybody. All right. You guys like that movie? Great movie. Well, let me just get started with you, Stuart. Just, we know why you did the shows, but, you know, putting the movie together, I don't think you really kind of, over the years, kept like tight archives. So at what point did you think of doing the movie, and how did you really had to reach out and find all this stuff, and, you know, when did you think of it as, oh, this is a story, this is a movie, this is something to show people?
Yeah, actually, I think it came about by me being a fan of music documentaries, and sort of like, I have some friends back in LA that we would just like 3 or 4 of us would get together and just, you know, get a 6-pack and like watch a doc about Captain Beefheart or The Fall or whatever. We'd be learning stuff, and it took me a while to think, oh, well, you know, I have a background. I produced a music documentary, Better Living Through Circuitry, and worked in TV and doing reality stuff and things like that. You know, I could do a music documentary. And then it still took me a while to realize that, like, I had my own story that was actually really interesting. And I sort of started finding these bits and pieces. I remember there's a thing on Dangerous Minds about Sonic Youth playing in the desert. You know, I realized, oh, this kind of had like a legendary status. And so then, the first person that I talked to was my friend Mariska, who's in the film. And I was like, do you still have those pictures you took out in the desert? And so then together we started a Facebook group, and that really started bringing more things out, and we started finding people with footage. I just want to say, one of the people in the film is here tonight as well, my brother Ken Swezey, who you saw a few different spots, but he's the one that gives the directions out to Game Monster Jamboree, so give him a shout out.
So, I mean, starting the film, did you, I mean, you have this outline of a memory, right? But translating that onto either paper or film, you know, it's easy to think about it in your own head. Oh yeah, this could be a great movie. But then once it starts coming out of your head, and you're actually trying to make a movie, things get more complicated. I mean, how did you get started? How long did it take? I mean, just the early process.
Early process, really, it did start with this Facebook group, and then, you know, started getting back in touch with people. Alexander Haka from I Should Know About was the first interview that we did, and that was kind of interesting because he had not been out to the desert in all that time, 30 plus years by that time, and he was like, oh, I wish I had time to do it. I'm going to Joshua Tree, but, you know, like, I'm going to do a sound bath. And, you know, and I was like, wait a second, you're going to Joshua Tree? Do you realize how close that is to where you guys played? And then I'll meet you there, just stay there. So having one interview kind of made a huge difference. Another big thing was Matt Heckert told someone who at the time was writing for Vice, Joey, that's also in the film, that, you know, there's this thing called Desolation Center, and you should check it out. It's a good story, you know. And so he interviewed us about the show when we were in the very early days of the film. And that article was such a good arc, and it really kind of helped, I think, all of us kind of understand the story better, particularly the editor, Tyler, who I worked with, and, you know, kind of helped shape it all. So.
Right. And then how long did you just keep finding more stuff? More pictures, more film, more...
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, getting back in touch with people like Lee and you know, all the people that were in the film really helped as well. And Lee is an amazing archivist himself, and like, he's like, I got these great photos. So it was like one thing led to another, and I think, you know, some people are much better than I at like keeping track of all this stuff. And, you know, even like the Super 8 footage of P. Boone that was from the show that Sonic Youth did.
Footage?
Yeah, right. So just doing it. Also, we did an art show in San Pedro at a gallery, well, it's not a workspace called Cornelius Projects. And that show, Naomi Peterson, who's kind of a legendary hardcore photographer who shot a lot of SST bands and stuff. Her brother found out about it, and then he's like, I got this hard drive of all of Naomi's stuff, and she's no longer with us. So, you know, that was pretty intense to see her work and to see the stuff that she'd shot out in the desert and stuff. So it was just, yeah, it was kind of a one thing leading to another, but it seems like the more that we did, the more that we found. So.
Right. So you guys, you know, Lee and Steve, you guys, how many times have you been to LA or California before? You were East Coast and you were a band.
We were, but Kim grew up in Westwood in LA. And so we kind of used it as our West Coast base. So we'd go out there for a month or 2 months at a time, we started to meet you and Dave Markey and this whole little coterie of people out there that we were hanging out with, Ray Pettibone and the Minutemen, and so we spent a fair bit of time out there, but we hadn't played out there until this show. It was a super meaningful show for us because we'd been spending some time in LA, getting used to it and hanging out and meeting people. But we still hadn't done a show there.
So you were meeting the community, because I started going out there around then too. The community wasn't huge,
No,
it was
not at all.
like, it was easy to meet everybody. You go to like 4 or 5 shows and you practically met everybody already.
Half of them in the film.
So why was it in a way that you hadn't really played there yet? You didn't go there.
We were just getting off the ground. This
Yeah.
was January '85.
Right.
So we were just, we had just done our first, U.S. tour, like the whole country that summer, basically, or something like that. And we had just never played in L.A. It was hard, It was those days of that indie circuit where it wasn't assured that a young band could play.
Yeah, no, LA was hard. I mean,
We had our police force making it even harder.
But there were these magnets out there. What was going on at SST Records was drawing us out there. There were so many aspects right then of LA culture that we were just like, sponging up from the East Coast and seeing those bands when they would come here, Black Flag and Minutemen, the Meat Puppets, and so we were ready to get out there, And it was in a way, Thurston said in the film, the perfect Californiization of Sonic Youth. In a way, it really gave us this foothold on the West Coast that was important to us.
There's this long history of this kind of migration west from the East Coast, going back decades, and I remember the early 80s, there was this kind of exodus, a lot of people moved there, a lot of East Coast fans spent a lot of time there. It was like, all of a sudden everything is happening in LA, these little spurts, and it continues to this day, because I'm going back and forth all the time, so you didn't play the first show, but you heard about it from these guys. So what was that like? Just hearing about, we did this, we're going to do this warehouse show, but last time we played in the desert.
Like, it's the greatest thing to join the band and hear stories about playing with the Minutemen and the Meat Puppets, who were 2 of my favorite bands. So I think maybe we played at the loading dock before the warehouse.
Yeah.
So that was one of my first shows in LA. Was playing in conjunction with Stuart and with Desolation Center. So it was a great thing, and of course I wish I'd been there when they turned the lights off for the Meat Puppets, and I'd seen that.
But what Sandy is talking about in the film, where she says, "Did you see it?" She's talking about that night. There was an incredible rainbow ring all around the moon, and she never says it, but I'm sure that's what she was asking about. It was, the lights were out, and at that point, everybody saw it. The moon was up there, and there was this ring around the moon that was pretty impressive that night. And I was not tripping. I think Sonic Youth and maybe Red Cross, given what they say in the film about pulling up late, I think we were the only ones there who weren't. Maybe.
I'm glad you explained that, Lee, because I knew there would be community pride, and there was supposed to be something in the sky.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
actually, there's somebody who was part of the early desert rock, stoner rock scene, who said that there were UFOs overhead that were just keeping an eye on them.
That was the acid.
Yeah, but yeah.
No, I love Thurston's comment that, it's kind of like, the straight persons from the scene comment. It's like, this was feeling really, really, really good. This was like a cool show. And then I found out everybody was like tripping.
I like Bob Bird's perspective. She's like, do people still do acid?
Well, it's funny because also we were talking before about the whole California, the LA native kids, all the kids who were, they never went out to the desert as kids, their parents, it's kind of like New Yorkers never going to the Statue of Liberty, And so finally, they're going out there and rediscovering California in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those, like Bert was saying, it was like we were trying hard to be urban and cool, and being in downtown was like the closest thing to like whatever East Village experience you guys were having. So for me, it was also like, let's throw all that out, because being that close to the desert is something that we have that all these other cities don't. So it's more like kind of embracing who we were and where we were geographically.
In a way, it made it even more exotic for us, because at least you guys were close to that environment and probably visited it trip to trip or whatever on occasion. But coming from New York, it was just a complete surreal landscape for us to be out there. You know, it wasn't the day-to-day existence.
It's literally the opposite. I mean, New York is like small, tight, you're living in small spaces, and you go out there, it's vast, it's open, it's limitless.
But I also always felt like that Sonic Youth had this aspect of it that was Americana, and you guys sort of embraced, you know, the whole like Route 66 kind of whatever.
Just by driving it many times. We did. You know, we saw it from that perspective. We drove through the Southwest and through the desert a lot.
Yeah. I mean, playing in the desert too, I mean, did you guys have all the sand problem? You had like sand in your equipment for weeks after that?
The thing I remember that was really cool is that you could kind of like kick up the sand while you were playing, and it would make a little cloud of dust. It was fun. It was very different.
Right,
you know, the sound bounced off those. You know, it's kind of in a rocky semicircle or something there where the show was, and it sounded great. I remember during someone's set, like walking away from the stage and being off in the middle of these big rocks and just hearing the sound bounce off different walls of rock walls. It was really impressive.
So, Jenn, so you gravitated. Jenn wrote this, just maybe as a quick intro. Before the film premiered at Slamdance, Jenn either reached out to you or something. Jenn wrote a great story, an article, the week of the Slamdance Film Festival. She pitched it to the New York Times, and the holy grail for a movie going to a big film festival is like getting an article that's not a review but a story in the New York Times. And she did this for this film, and it was so. What compelled you to? How did you connect? Because you weren't even born when this happened. So you gravitated toward this music, this scene. How did you find out about it? You know, how does your story fit in here?
I don't remember. I think I just got an email about it or something, but I was immediately really intrigued because the story of Desolation Center kind of brings together so many of my personal interests, like aside from including this interesting part of the story of so many of my favorite bands. I also have booked shows since I was a teenager, like since I was 16 or something, and I've always been really inspired to book shows and participate in shows in places that aren't bars or clubs. I've been kind of involved with DIY underground music in New York since I was 18 or whatever. And also, in 2018, I went to the desert for the first time, so I was like newly enchanted by the desert and the experience of the desert. So I was like, wow, this is like really my speed right now. Sonic Youth in the desert. I was involved with this venue in Brooklyn called the Silent Barn that closed in April of 2018, and the whole spirit of Desolation Center is so similar to the spirit of the Silent Barn. Just like, I have this insane idea, like let's have a show for 24 hours. There will be a different performer every 30 minutes. Who wants to play? Like participating, stuff like that. And at the end of the 24 hours at like 9 a.m. being like, wow, we all did it together. Like, wild. So yeah, it just felt very like akin to stuff that I was into.
And what was your pitch? I mean, I know a lot of people pitch in the New York Times trying to get a story in there, and you just had a feeling like, oh, this is perfect. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that there is this like tangible proof that it had this legacy of inspiring major festivals kind of helped too, to be able to say like, not only is this really awesome, but it inspired Lollapalooza and Coachella, and having that sort of concrete peg in a way. So that helped, though it's not the most interesting thing about Desolation Center to me. The kind of everything else is more interesting. And
You wanted a story in the New York Times too, right, that year.
yeah.
Was it your first story for the Times?
Well, when I was in college, I wrote for this New York Times East Village website. So I had written some online only articles for this New York Times blog. But yeah, it was my first
This was a major story in there, it was a film review, right? Or
It wasn't
No,
a
it wasn't.
review.
It
It
wasn't.
was actually the music section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I also just wanted to mention that since seeing this film and writing the piece, I have participated in both a desert show and a boat show. And I want to say that both of them were probably inspired by Desolation Center, which I kind of just occurred to me while I was watching.
So we were talking yesterday a little bit. I want to kind of talk about this, and you guys can chip in on this. We were talking, 83 to 85 in LA. The culture was changing. The subculture, the underground culture. Like the late 70s, early 80s, LA Hollywood punk thing was kind of past, and the suburban, South Bay hardcore thing was kind of past, and things were changing a lot. And you had these new ideas, and these were all newer bands with a very different sound. This was all very fresh. This is like, early sound, early Minutemen, and you wanted to get out. So talk about that. It was game on. People were willing to participate in this and follow you.
I mean, I think Dave Markey, that when he was sitting next to Lee, kind of summed that up about, things were getting weirder, songs were getting longer. And he was taking things in his direction of making crazy underground films like this for teenage love dolls. Nobody was making like John Waters films as teenagers, So there was just so many. It was like, why can't we just do this? And so to me, I took on sort of the role of why can't we do a show places where nobody does it? But everybody, I think, was sort of just willing to go out on a limb, and there was really, it's like, I don't know whether it's easy to understand here in New York. Maybe it's similar in a certain way, but LA is the center of the world entertainment, and we were so not part of that industry at all. So there was no money at stake here at that point. Just how do we get this record out? How do we get the zine, printed, and people Xeroxing things at their work at night and stuff. So it was, everybody just kind of pitched in, and that whole kind of like Mickey Rooney, let's put on a show thing is really how things got done.
Yeah.
So you were in the industry then?
Yeah. You can see it.
It rubbed off.
So the early manifesto you guys wrote. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? That was
So that was interesting. I of course remember that I had been involved in writing it, but it was almost like a forgotten thing because it was from before the desert shows. It was these early sort of nomadic gigs that we were putting on. But some good friends of mine were like, "Oh, I found the original flyer, the one with Community FK on it, and look at the back. You wrote this really funny thing, And I was like, whoa. I really didn't remember that we were that conscious, sort of, And so it was really cool for me that we had put all these statements. Even some of them are a little absurd looking back on it, but at the same time, I think the idea of, kind of committing to this manifesto was important, and it did sort of guide, I think, the things that happened later, even though I didn't know that we were going to end up in the desert and doing shows with Sonic Youth.
But the ethos kind of stuck in a way.
Yeah, and it was surprisingly consistent, I think. And so I guess just, really the gist of it was, there was the Sunset Strip, there was, the big radio stations and stuff like that. And we just wanted to really carve out an area that was completely separate from that.
Right. So when you guys did the Death Valley 69 video, that was what year was that again, the video? That was after, right?
I think it was a little bit after. We were playing that song, you see us playing that song, but I don't know if we made that video. We made that video on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's right. Richard Curran did that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Curran did that. Okay. Yeah. So, I don't know, are there any questions from the audience? Does anybody want to participate? Yes.
Obviously, there's like a time lag of like 30 years from when you put on the event and when you decide you're going to make a movie. At what point did you realize you had enough footage from back then? Were you self-documenting back then and aware of it, or were you just having to find people that may have shot film?
Well, it was a kind of a combination. That's an interesting question because, you know, in order for people to shoot, like especially being on the school bus, like there's a filmmaker, Gary Walco, that, you know, heard about the first show, wanted to shoot the next one, and I said, look, you know, you're welcome to shoot it, but can we all kind of like pull the footage? But it was just so hard back then to actually get access to, you know, it wasn't like you could just bring your hard drive or whatever.
Right. Cell phones.
Right, well, for sure that. And then, so some things I knew about, other things like Joy at Sea was kind of an SST project, but nobody ever did anything with it, and the audio was really bad. So I think, also there's like a legendary lost VHS cassette that was supposed to be called Corn Dogs that somehow got lost in the mail. Anyway, but then I started seeing some footage on YouTube of that. And so, you know, different things kind of came together over time. And it's true, I don't think you can make a really interesting documentary about a period of time without having the footage to go with it. But in the case of the first Desert Show, we only had stills. So we kind of worked with that. And Tyler, I think the editor did a really good job of sort of teasing. So you're like, well, are we gonna get to see any of this? Or, you know, and then there's another person that I always have to give a lot of credit to. His name's Bob Durkee. And as part of this Facebook group, he got a hold of us and he said, you know, I went out to all your shows and I have cassette tapes that I recorded on my Sony Walkman. Do you want to use those? And so that's kind of, you know, also something that made it possible, is that there was audio that we could put together with the video, because a lot of times it wasn't always, you know, the audio that you would have wanted. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any year who was at any of the shows. I was at the Moon Mountain show.
Right.
And how was John Rice involved? That's his name up there. From Target Video, right?
Wow, from Target Video, yeah. So John Reese, actually, he's a good friend who is a filmmaker as well. And so if you know him from Target Video, he used to film the Survival Research Laboratory shows and made documentaries about them. And so that's how I met him originally, because I would put on video nights. We used to call it Assault Video at the Anti-Club. And so I put on the first SRL video night in Los Angeles. And then, so in terms, he wasn't at any of those shows, but he made a film as a director called Better Living Through Circuitry about rave culture and sort of 90s electronic music, EDM. So I ended up getting involved in that, and I went out to some of these desert parties, and it really felt like, oh, I'm coming back home, even though the music was completely different. So I ended up to be a producer on that, and so then when it was time for me to make this film, I kind of reached out to John to get some advice and help and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm totally jealous, because every time I see this film, I'm so bummed out that I wasn't there when, Mark Pauline was blowing shit up in the desert, you know, because I spent the summer of 1980 in Berkeley in San Francisco, and I saw them perform under the bridge, under the freeway there.
Yeah, I mean, a full-on Survival Research Laboratories show was really different than what they did out in the desert for logistical reasons, but they're both great in their own ways, because, I mean, what an imagination to figure out what he could do with such limited resources out there in the desert.
I want to go back to Berlin for a second, because you go to Berlin after the first or second show?
After the first show.
So there's a break there. So you go to Berlin and you run into these guys.
Yeah, I don't know whether Lee remembers the meeting, but I was hanging out there for probably 2 to 3 months, and there was a club called The Loft,
Yeah,
and
that's
I
where
would
we
go.
played.
Yeah. And so I saw Sonic Youth, I saw Instruments to Know About, and then that led to, when I came back to California, doing shows with them. I guess I was sort of pre-sold on
Is
Sonic
that
Youth.
the first place we met? Not in California, but in Berlin?
Right, because, it was like you guys put on a show, and I was like, oh, they're American. Like, you know, I said to them, I can speak to these people, you know. And I was blown away to see them at that point. And then you guys were like, yeah, we just kind of go around on the train.
We got to Berlin before we got to LA. That's how, we were able to go to Europe in those very early years, and we just never managed to play in LA till a bit later. But you know, we were playing a lot, but we were playing East Coast stuff and going to Europe a bunch, I guess.
But I mean, when you say going to Europe, I mean, my impression was you were just kind of like, you quit your jobs and you know, you were just kind of like nomadically going around Europe doing gigs. It wasn't like somebody booked a tour.
No, it was a tour.
Okay.
It was always a tour, yeah. And we probably quit our jobs a little bit just before the desert show.
Okay.
That moon rising period or something like that.
Is that footage of them in Berlin? Is that them in Berlin? Is that actually footage of them in Europe, or?
It's the stills. Yeah, we didn't have the stills. But
Yeah, no,
these
stills.
found
In the
it.
loft, yeah.
Yeah.
From the loft, yeah.
Yeah.
That is accurate.
That is
Yeah.
accurate. That is on point. Good. But the whole mindset there. I mean, you're coming from, you know, L.A., Chief Daryl Gates, repression, and Berlin is kind of a different flavor of that in a way. And it you know, or not really, but it.
I thought it was super free, actually. I mean, like, I was sort of blown away at how much freedom people actually had. Coming from Los Angeles. Yeah, I mean, not in East Germany, but in East Berlin. And I didn't even think as a young person, I didn't even understand that the wall went all the way around Berlin. I kind of had this idea it was like on the border or something, but it was completely surrounded. And it was like, it was, I mean, you know, as an American tourist, you know, you look at it one way. I mean, it was a really, really repressive regime in East Germany, but it was kind of like Stalinist Disneyland in another way. You could just take the subway and come up and, you know, there's Karl Marx and Engels and all this. And so it was, I just thought it was fascinating. You know, there's so many different layers to it. And the people in the West side, you know, there was a lot of squatting. There were a lot of people that didn't pay rent at all and just kind of, you know, could live out whatever they wanted to do. And also, you didn't have, they had mandatory military service in Germany unless you lived in West Berlin, because they wanted to keep it populated. So you had all the more radical people that didn't want to be in the military all there, just kind of like, and sticking it out, because otherwise you're in the army.
Did you guys spend a little time there when you went there, or was it kind of like in and
No,
out?
we went there quite frequently in those periods where you'd have to drive those 3 hours through the DDR on these, you know, you'd cross into East Germany and the roads were just like trash practically. You could barely drive on them for like 3 hours, and if you were on the train, the guards would come through with the dogs and all that stuff. But we loved Berlin because, in a way, it was very similar to Manhattan. It's an island. It's an island city like Manhattan was, and in that period, you know, what was going on here when we started was really like this cauldron of stuff happening. And it was, if you didn't live in Manhattan, you really didn't find out about it. There was no internet or fanzines or anything. And Berlin had a similar thing happening right then. There was all of this amazing art and, you know, music and things happening there. And it was also this kind of little island. So we really related to it in a lot. It seemed very similar to New York. And before the wall came down, it was probably similar size too. It wasn't very big as it is now.
Let's go back to some questions. Yes?
I think this is a question for everybody on stage. I feel like, do you feel like something like the Desolation Center is it's easier to get into these environments in Los Angeles compared to being somewhere like New York? Because Los Angeles is, and outside of Los Angeles is filled with mountains, deserts, places, you know, you talk about Spawn Ranch, right? You know, LA has this history of ranches, art ranches, getaways, little hidden spots that wouldn't necessarily be able to exist, I think, in New York. So you feel like stuff like this could really only happen in an environment that's that kind of landscape or anywhere.
I'm trying to think of other things like that that actually do happen here. Like ATP used the Concord hotels, that old bungalow community upstate, and did something, and that was probably the same amount of drive out of New York as going to the desert was from LA. There's certainly a lot more land to use, but I think stuff like that does actually happen here on occasion in stranger, you know, with the thing we did at the Greenwood Cemetery was a little bit like that. It's still in the city, but you know, it was pretty wild there that night.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term site specific, and it kind of describes, and I thought that Greenwood Cemetery, you know, at first I was like, oh, we're screening this cemetery, that's not really, it's just so goth, whatever. But then when I got there, it was such an amazing landscape, and it was a great use of it. I mean, between showing this film and then the performance that Lee did, which, you know, where he had it was a cherry picker where they actually used to put the graves, in, you know, the coffins into the graves, sorry. And then he had his guitar swinging around from it, and all the feedback and other noise that he was creating. It just felt like the whole place was kind of like the spirits were coming alive. And so I think it's more about being creative about where you are. I mean, we did a screening at Third Man Records in Detroit, and I thought, oh God, the Detroit people, they're just, you know, they're not gonna like this, it's too soft, LA, you know, but they loved it, and you know, the people that were there were like, oh, there's a place, you know, in the Upper Peninsula where you could do a show, there's an abandoned factory, you know, we can bring Survival Research Laboratory. So I think it's more about just kind of looking at where you are and working with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I help organize this festival in Hudson called Basilica Soundscape, which I could draw similarities to Desolation Center in the sense that it's like a lot of people go up to Hudson for this weekend-long festival, and kind of part of the experience of going, and it takes place in this venue, Basilica Hudson, which is a reclaimed, refurbished factory that kind of now has this basilica-like feel. The train goes by outside, and but part of it is like everyone making this journey together upstate. That kind of like contributes to, like, you know, goths taking over the small town for the weekend. And yeah, I feel like that kind of like collective energy contributes to the whole feel of the festival.
So you're talking for you grew up in Long Island, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so were you coming into the city a lot to find your culture, or was stuff going, what was your, did you break away from Long Island? What was, you know, growing up, how did you find your?
Well, I was really into going to shows on Long Island from like ages 13 to 16 because at the time, like the mid-2000s, there were a lot of all-ages DIY shows happening in like VFW halls and temples and backyards, practice spaces, driveways. Me and my sister threw shows in our backyard, then our parents like stopped letting us because the grass got gross or something. And that was like really formative to start going to shows in that way before we realized that the Long Island emo scene sucked and started going into the city to see other shows. So yeah, kind of both.
Back there?
Oh, that was just a signal that we're gonna have to take one last question.
Oh, okay, we're wrapping it up. Is there another question? Oh, yes.
So my question is, when did you know it was time to sort of make this film? Or were you like thinking about it for a long time?
So when did you know, kind of back to the first question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer was that first I wanted to make a film, and then I realized that like I had a film in my own story, my own life, and it didn't seem like anybody else was going to tell it. But I have to say, there's one thing I should mention, that there's a German filmmaker who made a film, his name is Jörg Steineck, about the desert rock scene, like the stoner rock, Caius type thing. It's called Lo-Fi Desert, Low Sound Desert. And so he said, I heard like all this stuff came from these desert shows that you did. Tell me about it. I'm like, okay. And then he's like, I can't really fit this into my film. We should do a film together. And I'm like, cool. And then I realized, like, no, that was never going to happen. So if I didn't do it, nobody was going to. So Jörg deserves a lot of credit, actually, for kind of getting me motivated.
So in closing, I want to just tell a little story. Like, you know, Perry, you tried to get Perry for a long time, but so when the film played at Slamdance, Perry wasn't in the movie. But we had to get him to come and see the movie at Slamdance.
Right.
And wait a minute, I want to be in the movie, right?
Yeah, Paul is actually really instrumental in the fact that Perry Farrell is in the film on camera, you know, doing the interview, which I thought he did a great job and added a lot to it. But we got to Park City, the article had just run, and then Paul's like, okay,
I heard he was up there.
He was tweeting that he was in Park City,
Right.
had nothing to do with Desolation Center. He was looking for virtual reality artists to some, project that he was doing. And Paul's like, you gotta get Perry to, come to a screening, and I'm like, oh, I've been trying to get Perry to do an interview for like going on 3 years now, I will do one tweet, because I was getting really tired of like emailing his manager and stuff like that. And so I'm just gonna do a tweet and see what happens, and like I'll shut Paul up, And immediately we get an email from Perry's assistant, like he's in town, he wants to come to the screening. So then let's do would it be okay if he did a Q&A with you? I'm like, Yeah, of course, and then it was a kind of an intense experience, I think, because so many of these people really were people that were mutual friends of ours, and it was his life.
The funny thing is, I had met Perry like years before, and Perry came to Slamdance 10 years earlier with the Jane's Addiction concert film. And it was a freaking nightmare having him there, because he was there, he was kind of a big star already, and he was doing things like, so is there a back door into the theater so I can come in for the Q&A? I mean, his managers were all around him, and you were telling me, well, why don't you reach out to him? Like, no way, I don't have anything to do with him again. Because it was so complicated when he was there, like it was there in like 99 or 2000.
But the gist of it was that he saw the film without himself in it, and he was like, I really want to be in this film. So, which was great in the sense that it confirmed a lot of things that otherwise we were just sort of suggesting, like that he was actually inspired by the stuff. So, I think that was important, and also it gave me a chance to cut it one more time in terms of what Paul was saying about, not the whole film, but just to tweak little things and change things, and so I think it ended up with a much better film.
Yeah, it worked. And I love the picture at the end. It has his notebook taking notes. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot. I think we're done. Thanks for coming. Thank you to everybody.
For IFC and Paul and
then
Lee and Jenn for being here. Appreciate it.
So the film is kind of rounding down its theatrical touring thing a little bit, and there's going to be a release, right? There'll be digital.
All that stuff's being figured out as well, but we will definitely be some form of streaming and DVD, and we're playing Hot Springs, Arkansas together next month with the Daydream Nation film. Yeah. Great.